What is up, everybody? I am Derek Staley. With me is Reese Flexner. Welcome to ESFI's Assembly Preview. Obviously, we have Assembly coming up this weekend. Reese, let's jump right into it. Obviously, MLG, also the same weekend, they kind of double booked over top of Assembly. But then they announced pay-per-view. So what does the pay-per-view for MLG, do you think, mean for Assembly now that they're happening on the same weekend?
I don't know. The thing is that a lot of their the times don't overlap very much because assembly happens at like starting 3 in the morning Eastern time, whereas MLG is going to start at like 3 p.m. Eastern time. Um, so yeah, the one thing that the way they might interact most is that you might get fatigue for all of your viewers if there's literally going to be StarCraft on from 3 in the morning to like 12 midnight every day. That's a lot of StarCraft to watch.
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's not going to do anything. Well, the pay-per-view part, after they double booked, isn't going to do too much negative for Assembly. You make a good point about the starting time. A large part of the North American audience probably wasn't going to watch Assembly until the finals anyway. And it's difficult to avoid overlapping events at this point. Even though MLG did say they kind of dropped the ball on this one and forgot about Assembly. So it would be nice to see increased cooperation between the tournaments, but I don't think for the most part the pay-per-view is going to have any. I mean, I think it's going to have a positive effect for Assembly really than it would have been if MLG was a free stream.
Um, One thing I'm actually kind of worried about is that MLG has announced that there's a free stream for like the first hour, hour and a half or so before the event, and if that's during some really good, like the really good end matches of Assembly, people might not want to watch the free preview, and then they might not want to buy the event.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously a concern for MLG. For Assembly, I mean that's not a bad thing for them. If
I
people,
don't care.
yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think for Assembly, as far as Assembly goes, this probably is the best case scenario after MLG booked on top of them. I think as far as viewer count goes, this is going to be the best thing that could have happened for Assembly after it was double booked. A lot of people aren't going to want to pay the $20. A lot of people are going to want to watch free StarCraft. They're used to free StarCraft. I mean, even if you get a bad quality, people like free stuff. So
We
yeah,
deserve
and,
StarCraft.
and I mean, and on top of that, there's a lot of free publicity going on in this. A lot of people, once the pay-per-view was announced, I think a lot of people didn't even know about Assembly. And you look on Reddit and everywhere, it's like, oh, well, instead of watching MLG, I'm going to watch Assembly instead. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
think for the most part, Assembly is going to be all right with MLG on the same weekend. So, let's get into
Yeah.
the actual games here. Arena has an amazing, amazing lineup. So, did Assembly kind of turn into the best of the rest, or do you think it's still a legitimate tournament here?
I don't know. There's a lot of really solid players playing in Assembly, and some of them, like Select and Hero and Puma and Stefano, they chose specifically. They didn't even participate in the qualifiers for Arena. They just said, no, we're just going to go to Assembly. So obviously, it's not just that these aren't the guys who managed to get to Arena, and it's a really good list of people too.
Yeah, but at the same time, I don't think there's any way to really argue that the player pool at MLG isn't stronger. I mean, the player pool at MLG is pretty amazing. You have three top eight GSL Codessa this season, including Donger Goose in the round of four. You have MVP, you have Nest Team, Ring King, MLG, MC I think is there. MLG is pretty loaded. Still, Assembly does have a lot of great players. You have all everybody you just mentioned. You have a lot of top European pros. You do have some good Koreans coming. You have Hero, you have Puma. So I think it's still a really, really good tournament. And if MLG, wasn't this weekend, I don't think people would be questioning the integrity of the player pool the quality of the quality of talent that'll be at Assembly this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely not. And the thing is a lot of those really big names like Nesty and MVP, the names that really legitimize Arena, they don't really go to the mid-tier European tournaments anyway. So who's to say that most of the players from Arena would even have gone to Assembly hadn't if they had not been on the same weekend?
That's a really good point. So speaking of that, we actually do have less Koreans than we would see at MLG, and not necessarily the top Koreans. So do you think an international player is going to break through?
Um, I don't know. The thing is that in past assemblies, the Scandinavians have done really, really well for themselves. Something about their hometown, the crowd behind them. I remember the assembly crowds being really big, so that could play a factor in pumping out all the hometown heroes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see the international players breaking through still. There's still really, really good Koreans here. Obviously, Stefano is a lot of people just pick as their international hope, but 10 Koreans is a lot of really good Korean players.
Sure.
We'll probably see some Koreans fall to early upsets, but even if you take out a couple early on, there's still going to be 7, 8 Koreans getting through the group stage. I think that it's going to be really tough for any one player, even if it's Stefano, who actually has a pretty good group to get through out of in the first round. I think it's going to be tough for anybody to really beat the Korean players here. I think we're going to be seeing another Korean victory.
Yeah, I do kind of agree that there might be, one or two foreign players that really break out here, but there's probably going to be 6 or 7 Koreans in the top 8 anyway. So even if one player manages to go on a good run, it's still going to be like a little mini Korean tournament in the later rounds, probably.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the player list here. Obviously, Assembly was invite only, even though some of the players probably didn't come because they were going to MLG. But we have half as many Zergs as the other races. What do you make of that?
I don't know, it's just weird. It's just one of those things where, you can either choose to have like affirmative StarCraft action and, have quotas for all the different races, or you can just say, oh, we'll just pick all of the best players that we can get, and that sometimes leads to unbalanced racial distribution, but a better general overall tournament.
Yeah, I never really get too much into worrying about, are the races perfectly even on invites or anything like that. Obviously, Sao Paulo had 10 Zergs and Kiev had 9 Protosses. So, I mean, it's one of those things that it just kind of happens. And unless it's an event like, Code S, I don't really worry too much about racial balance, really. Because really, it doesn't really matter. It's really just who's the better players up until you're at the top level. So, I'm not really too worried about it, I don't think.
Yeah, exactly. The one thing that I kind of worry about is as soon as one race gets completely wiped out of a tournament, I suddenly lose like all interest in it. Like when there were no Protoss in the round of 16 of that Codex, that was so painful for me. So I really want at least one Zerg to go far, whether that's Violet or Stefano, just to break up the tedium of PvT over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite so extreme. Obviously, we're talking about personal preference now. I mean, I do enjoy watching Zerg vs Protoss, but I can live without ZVZ. I'll be okay if I don't see any Zerg mirror matchups. And I do like watching Terran vs Terran and TVP, so I'm okay with both those matchups, and I'll live without ZVZ if I have to. So I understand where you're coming from there, but for me, not really the end of the world. So let's talk a little about the players. Aside from Korea, we do have kind of two big player blocks in the Sweden-Finland group and the Russian-Ukraine group. So it's kind of interesting because normally I would say that Sweden and Finland have a stronger group of players, but Maro's not there, Naniwa's not there, Thorsney's not there,
Yeah.
Sho, Sase, all these players aren't there, and the Russian group looks really really strong. You have Braddock, Happy, Strelok, Kas. So do you think that the Russians and Ukrainians will do better than the Swedish and the Finns this time?
Yeah, I mean it is insane how many good Swedes there are. It's completely absurd just when you list all of them like that. And so while in almost any other tournament you always want to say, oh yeah, the Swedes are going to do great. With players like Cass and Braddock here, and for some reason there aren't that many good former USSR players at MLG this time. I don't know. They only sent Palmy really from Russia and Ukraine, so I think they're gonna make a strong showing at this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, Sweden gives up all those players, and they still have players like Genro and Bishu at the tournament, and then, you look at Finland, and they have Elfi and Satini and players like that. So, I mean, it's not like they have a bad group of players here. I think, I just don't think they have as good a group as the Russians and the Ukrainians have.
Yeah, I really like Elfie. I always hope he does well.
Yeah, I mean, it's some really good players there that we don't really. I wish we would get to see more often at some of the North American events because obviously we don't get to see them as much over here. So,
Yeah.
let's talk about some of the games here. Obviously, the Koreans are the favorites, but who do you have as an underdog?
I always like Right Raw. I always like White Raw when, especially when he's playing in Europe. There's just he'll just come out of nowhere, and he will have not, done that well in tournaments beforehand, but then all of a sudden just like take a tournament by storm and get really far in it. So I think he's my underdog pick this time.
Yeah, I mean that's not a bad pick. White Raw obviously is a really good player. Doesn't always have the greatest mechanics, but he does seem to come up with things just out of nowhere and somehow wins games. So pretty solid pick. I picked Cass as my underdog in Kiev, and he finished third. I'm gonna ride him again. I mean he's playing really really well this year. Won One Nation of Gamers Invitational. Obviously played well in Kiev. So I have high hopes for him throughout the year, and I'm just gonna keep on running with him until I think eventually he's gonna break through this year.
Yeah, Koss is really good. Another foreigner pick is TLO. He just all killed Prime in the IPL Team League, or he almost did. It was really close. He killed four of them, including Marine King. So, maybe he's just about to start a good run. And for my Korean underdog, I like Moon. I remember Artosis said on State of the Game that Moon's been playing a lot lately. And he just destroys foreign tournaments. He'll just come in out of nowhere after literally not having played a game in like 2 months that any of us have seen, and will just destroy all of our best players. So Moon might make a good showing here.
Yeah, Moon's really interesting because this is the first time that he's actually playing the game full time. Obviously, he was still playing Warcraft 3 a lot of periods of that as his primary game. Obviously, preparing for World Cyber Games. So it's going to be interesting to see what he does actually as a full-time StarCraft 2 player because we haven't seen that yet. And he's obviously just an insanely talented RTS player, and he's a really really good player. So it's not a bad pick to think that he could start showing it. I don't know if he's had really enough time yet as a full-time player to really rebound back to where he needs to be. Obviously, last year around DreamHack, he was playing really, really well, but I don't know if he's back up to his top form yet, or if he still needs a little more time to get to there. But we'll find out hopefully this weekend. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the winner here. Usually there's a player or two that's pretty easy to pick out. Like if you have an MMA at a tournament or something like that, you can go, well, that's an easy pick. But I don't really see that in this event. We don't have any of the players who made it to round 8 this season. We have several Koreans who aren't even in Code A. I'm still going to go with Hero. I think that's a pretty solid pick. He's playing really well right now, playing really well in Code A. He plays well in international events, and I think he has a pretty manageable group too.
Yeah, here's never a bad pick. My pick, though, is one of those Koreans who isn't even in Code A anymore, just got knocked out, is Pult. He's the only GSL winner in this tournament. He won the Super Tournament way back when. So even though he's been a little bit hard-pressed in Korea lately, I think he'll come out and do really well this tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I quite agree with you on how good Pult's been playing lately, but he's still a solid pick. Obviously, a really good player. He has little recent struggles in Code A, but he did roll through the last qualifier for IPL4, and that bracket was absolutely stacked. If you haven't seen it, that was a ridiculous bracket. He beat Dream, STC, Creator, Bomber, and Hero. Actually, he did beat my pick, so it should be interesting. He has an interesting group. He has Phoenix, TLO, and Blink, so he can be a little inconsistent, but he's definitely capable of winning the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean his TVP is amazing, and this is a time when Terran seemed to be having a lot of trouble against Protoss. So, oh, yes, that's what I meant. And so he has Bling in his group, and Bling's good, but I think he can take him. And the other two Zergs in his group really just aren't as good as him, I don't think.
Yeah.
So, I think Paul will definitely make it through his group, and maybe even the whole tournament.
I think the one thing we have to watch out with the Terran players is obviously the patch just came out. Um,
That's true. That's very
and
true.
TVZ is going to be interesting because these guys aren't really going to have a whole lot of time to deal with the snipe nerf, especially. I don't think the Phoenix change is going to have quite as much of an impact because even if that does become a usable strategy, they're not really going to have the time to think about it. But they're actually going to have to. The Terran players are actually going to have to adjust their strategies because snipe is such an integral part of their late game TVZ that they're going to have to do something to change it. So it's going to be interesting to see how they adjust.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Alright guys, that's going to be it. Obviously, check out Assembly this weekend. You can follow us at ESFI, follow us on Facebook, and check us out at esfiworld.com, and we will have coverage all weekend long.